In an election year, we tend to refer to the frenzied process of selecting presidential candidates as the road to the nomination. However, if we're really being honest, we see that there's actually like 112, give or take, each as windy, pockmarked, and treacherous as the last. If you're not confused by this point, I can tell you after having researched all of this,
you will be. You will be.
Sorry, frog in my throat. You will be. Trust me, the facts and statements that I'll be making in this video will be loaded up with so many asterisks and exceptions that it would make a cell phone contract green with envy. This is the convoluted process of how presidential candidates get selected in the United States. In order to define where all of this starts, we ironically need to first talk about where it ends. After months of wearing down the electorate with debates, fundraising, and campaign adverts, the Republican and Democratic parties hold their respective national conventions. There, they'll decide on their official platform and select their candidate for President of the United States from a pool of viable contenders. The name of the game is delegates. Each state sends a number of representatives to debate and to decide who will be the nominee. Just like the Electoral College, candidates need to get 50% plus 1 to be immune from being voted off the proverbial island. But the different parties' candidates are vying for different numbers, so there's the first major split in the road. Republicans will have 2,472 delegates at their 2016 convention, while Democrats are expected to have 4,765. Expected because their numbers are truly only finalized just before the convention actually starts. That means that Republican candidates will need to secure 1,237 delegates to get their nominee, and a Democrat one needs to get 2,383. Probably. This gets significantly hairier because these delegates are not all made the same, but that's for a different video. For now, that's just yet another giant asterisk hanging over all of this, but we'll continue under the assumption that all the delegates are of the same breed. So how do candidates acquire delegates? Well, here's another fork in the road, but at least this one will probably explain all the headlines that we've been force-fed by the media lately. There are two main ways to get delegates, and these vary from state to state: primaries and caucuses. Primaries are the process that we tend to think of when it comes to elections. You go to the ballot box at any time during election day, check off a name, submit your vote, simple. Caucuses are a bit more involved. They require people to congregate at a pre-designated location at a specific time. Here, they will speak amongst themselves, maybe listen to candidates' representatives, and decide who they're going to support from there. But this means two different things for Republicans and Democrats. Republicans go through the whole song and dance and then get to cast their vote in a ballot box, basically like a more involved primary. Democrats, however, are even more involved and physical than that. They caucus by swarming into groups that support particular candidates. The number of people in each group are counted off in an attempt to find a clear winner. If a candidate does not receive a preordained proportion of the available caucus goers, say 15%, they are then dropped in that particular location, and the process repeats until a single candidate is decided upon. There are 18 places that utilize caucuses for the selection of presidential candidates in the United States: Iowa, Nevada, Alaska, American Samoa, Colorado, Minnesota, North Dakota, Wyoming, Kansas, Kentucky, Maine, Nebraska, Hawaii, Washington, Washington, D.C., the Virgin Islands, Idaho, and Puerto Rico. Why all the asterisks? Well, it turns out that in several of these states, only one party actually caucuses while the other opts for a primary. This is the case for Nebraska, Idaho, Washington, Puerto Rico, and Kentucky. It's mostly the Democrats that opt to caucus, with Kentucky Republicans being the exception to the rule. Alright, so remember about 45 seconds ago when I referred to primaries as simple? Well, I lied. It's simple enough as a concept, but it's way more complicated when you get into the weeds, and we're about to get into the tall stuff here. Let's start with who's allowed to vote in the primaries, because it's not as easy as going up to the polling booth and bubbling in your candidate of choice. Well, mostly. There are three main kinds of presidential primaries: open, closed, and hybrid. The latter is also called semi-open and semi-closed depending on where you look and who you ask, sort of like a glass half full or empty kind of deal. The main difference between these three is how permissive the state is regarding a voter's party affiliation. Open primaries are actually pretty simple. You get to decide which party's candidate pool you're going to select from, regardless of your personal affiliation. So if you're a Republican, you can vote in the Democratic or Republican primaries, and vice versa. It doesn't matter, it's your choice. Although you don't get to vote in both. You get to pick your suite of candidates to choose from, but you're stuck with it until the next go-round. States with open primaries include Alabama, Michigan, North Dakota, Arkansas, Minnesota, Vermont, Georgia, Missouri, Wisconsin, and Montana. Closed primaries are on the opposite end of the spectrum, where you are only allowed to vote in the primary of the party that you yourself are registered with. So if you're a Democrat, you can only select among Democratic candidates. Likewise, Republicans can only vote Republican, no crossovers. So if you live in Delaware, New York, Florida, Pennsylvania, Kansas, New Jersey, Washington, kinda, Kentucky, Louisiana, Nebraska, or New Mexico, whatever party you're registered with, that's the party you're going to have to vote with. But what about those individuals who don't affiliate with either Republicans or Democrats? After all, poll after poll informs us about the rising tide of essentially independent voters in the country. In closed primary states, they wouldn't get to vote unless they were forced to compromise on their neutrality, which, is decidedly uncool. So Maryland, Rhode Island, Arizona, Massachusetts, South Carolina, California, Mississippi, South Dakota, Connecticut, New Hampshire, Tennessee, Idaho, North Carolina, Texas, Illinois, Ohio, Utah, Indiana, Oklahoma, Virginia, Oregon, and West Virginia decided to basically follow the plan of closed primaries, but allow nonpartisan voters to decide which party they want to side with there and then. Alright, so states send delegates to the National Convention. How those delegates are allocated is determined by either a caucus or primary, the participants of which vary based upon the party affiliation and whether or not a state is open, closed, or hybridized. Great. Now comes the final major point of division: how we appropriate those delegates. There are two lines of thought here. The first is to make it like our congressional districts. Whoever gets the most votes get all of the delegates, also known as winner takes all. But there are issues associated with this too. With enough people in a winner-take-all system, it's probable that the winner won't get anywhere close to 50% of the vote, but they'll still get all of the pie. So other states decided that they were going to make the system more proportional. A gets 35% of the vote, so they get 35% of delegates, that sort of thing. Except, both winner-take-all and proportional allocation are actually misnomers. See, some of the states allocate delegates on two levels, the district and the state. If a candidate ekes out the most in the state's total vote pool, they get all of the delegates allocated on the state level, but they only acquire district delegates if they won on that level too. So unless a candidate wins in a total landslide, there will usually be a few delegates awarded to ostensibly losing candidates in winner-take-all states. Proportionality is also a big fat lie because states often set thresholds on what percentage of a vote a candidate must receive in order to be eligible to receive delegates. The Republicans vary from state to state, going from nothing up to 20%. So going back to our example from earlier, candidate D may feel entitled to 15% of the delegates, but he'll actually get 0. So it's really proportional-ish. Alright, let's recap. Potential candidates need delegates to become their party's nominee. Delegates are awarded by either caucuses or primaries, participation in which can be open, closed, or hybridized, and the allocation of delegates is either proportional-ish or winner take more. Okay, great. Looks like we've covered the most pressing exceptions and— wait, what's that? No! Okay, so here's the deal. There's actually one more way that states allocate delegates because of course there is. Party conventions. Despite the fact that they hardly get any press, party conventions are actually a fairly common way to select and allocate delegates. In fact, 19 states and territories utilize them at some point in the process. The main point of conventions is to select the specific delegates to attend the national convention. This may seem a bit underwhelming, but trust me, this is actually a big friggin' deal. Plus, the Northern Marianas use a convention outright in lieu of a caucus or a primary for both of their candidates, while DC uses one for the Republican nominee. And we're not even going to get into the states like Washington where everything is just a quagmire. As I've mentioned, the state has a primary for the Republicans and a caucus for the Democrats. Except there is a primary for the Democrats too, and like the Republicans, it's a closed contest. The party just ignores its results when determining who gets what at the convention in favor of the caucus, so it's basically just a closed-off beauty pageant. If there's anything I want you to take away from this video, except maybe, the title of the video itself, it's that weird quirks are the rule, not the exception.